We've all heard homilies on this gospel that seem to say that prayer, interpret this gospel as prayer is better than action, or a contemplative life is better than the active life or something. I've never been comfortable with that kind of playing these two off against themselves. Mary is clearly making some mistake here, but what is it exactly, I mean, she's not doing anything intrinsically wrong, right? Her hospitality, as we see in the first reading, is a good thing. But I think what she's done is lost perspective, you might say, in her doing for Jesus. She's missed that Jesus is there, so to speak. And that's the problem, is that our doing can sometimes take over and distract us from what's in front of us, distract us from God. And so I have some questions out of this gospel. First one is, why does our doing want to take over, so to speak? And it seems like it might be a weakness in our fallen human nature, Perhaps it's one of the wounds of original sin that we get too busy. We allow ourselves to be too busy. I even had a Trappist monk one time tell me that they were too busy in the monastery. Well, here's another sub-question. Why worry about it? What's the big deal? What difference does it make how busy we get or how focused we get on what we're doing? It seems to me, because it is a wound, it's something that the enemy can use very easily. He can exploit that to draw us away from Jesus, certainly, but also even just draw us away from our inner peace, or to bring us off center, Or here's another question. Not why does our busyness want to take over, but why does it take over? And to that, I have a very simple answer. Because we allow it to. We tell ourselves all the time that we don't have any choice. We complain about how busy we are. And obviously, we all have things that must be done, right? But we have more control over it than we think. I'll never forget one priest telling me that he went to another priest, kind of as spiritual direction, and in the course of their conversation, he was bemoaning how busy he was. And he had shown, I guess he pulls out back then it was like me, it was a book, it was his appointment book, And the older priest said to him, tell you what, I don't know if he pushed over a piece of paper or something, he says, write down the name and the number of the person who wrote all those things in your book, and I'll call him and tell him to stop doing that. And then here's another question. So why do we allow our busyness to take over? I think there are a lot of reasons to that, but I would suggest this is a big one. I think many people are afraid not to be busy. What happens in our doing and our busyness, right? I'm also including noise in this. I think having nothing to do allows us to hear ourselves, allows us to reflect on our lives, opens ourselves up to encounter God, to hear Him. Right? Having nothing to do opens us up to all of this. I'll never forget, if you remember, I had written a different high school retreat some years ago. And on the first one, the students kind of almost disintegrated. And when I met with them to find out what the problem was, one of them finally said, "Father, all this silence is terrifying." I don't think it's just young people who feel that way. We even allow our liturgy and our prayer to be busy and noisy. Really, as I talk to people, I think most people's idea of prayer is talking. Most people's idea of prayer seems to be doing. And even in the liturgy after Vatican II, it seems like we were supposed to all be doing something. There should be something going on at all times. No silence, And clearly the liturgy calls for silence. Even the church in her documents she says there are times in the liturgy when silence and not doing is appropriate. I had these two people complained once to me about silence, my silences in the liturgy. And they, without realizing, they were sort of piling up these things. He said, "Well, the problem with silence is it makes the liturgy too long." So we got to get back to what we're doing here, So I want to give just 3 quick things about how to keep life's duties and life's busyness from taking over. And one is, again, pretty simple: slow down. Say no. Schedule, if you have to, schedule some time of not doing in your life. Keep this in mind too. Teaching your children, part of that, and a big part, is the life that they see you leading, Tell them one sport, or maybe 2 sports, or you got to cut down. Give them an idea of what it's like and the value of not doing. Make some time sacrosanct. Come back to maybe supper together, that everyone has to be there with no phones at the table or something. Use technology, right? But be wary of it. People think I don't like technology. That's not completely true, really. But I just don't want it to take over, and I see how easily technology takes over. I remember speaking with an Amish farmer once, and he said almost the same thing to me. He said, people think we don't want electricity or don't want this or that. He says, it's not true. We just don't want it taking over our lives. And that's what we see happens with people. Or Wendell Berry, I don't know if you know that name. He's a pretty well-known Kentucky poet and farmer. And when farming changed, he changed with it, with tractors and all mechanized farming and stuff. But he went back to horses and mules. And I remember in one of his essays, it was kind of humorous. He said he realizes now why God wanted us to farm with mules. He said mules don't have headlights, so you can't work all night. He says horses have to rest and eat, which makes us rest and eat. Second thing, integrate our lives into God and integrate God into our lives. Bring everything to God in prayer. At the end of the day, reflect on the day. For me, of course, it's in the morning. I'm not much good at night. But the first part of my prayer most mornings is going back over the day before and talking to God about it. I know it's going to sound silly, but there's nothing that God doesn't know about my life because I tell him everything, Everything, the meetings I had, the people who came to confession, the praying for this or that or the other, asking questions about what I should be doing, what decisions should I make here and there. A lot of us lead, I see it, he's kind of, and one person even said it to me once. He says, well, that's my spiritual life. The rest of my real life, I do this, and I said, we don't lead 2 lives, we lead 1 life. Bring our lives to God. Talk to him, spend some time with him in prayer about our lives. And then the other way, integrate God into your life. think about, how does what the scriptures that I've been hearing, how does it inform what I'm doing? Or pray before all your meetings or all this, whatever you're doing. Don't lead two lives. Bring them together so God has a say in what you're doing, And then the third thing, if we do find ourselves feeling worried and anxious, and I'm not talking about anxiety attack here, like clinical anxiety is something else. You can't do much about it when anxiety attacks happen, right? I use the word anxiety for that. I use the word anxious when I'm worried about something, But if you do find yourself anxious or worried, stop. You've heard me say this. If you have time to worry, you have time to pray. And worry is a choice we make. I know it may feel like worries grab us, but the truth is, and it might be originally something grab, but stop. I always think of it this way: if I start to worry about something, if I wake up in the middle of the night worried, that tells me I haven't turned it over yet. So I stop and say, Stef, stop worrying, start praying. No matter how big the thing is that faces us, worry will not help it. Prayer will. We all have important things to do, but Jesus says there's one thing that's necessary, right? And that's to keep our lives centered in God. And I think that's what Martha forgot. Martha was in a flurry to do for Jesus and missed what Jesus wanted to do for her. And he wants to do for us as well, right? Remember what he says in Matthew's gospel: come to me and I will give you rest, right? Learn from me and you will find rest for your souls.